The room was silent except for the faint hum of the ventilator. The soft green lights from the monitors blinked in rhythm with Clara Monroe's fading heartbeat. She looked peaceful, too peaceful. Blake Monroe stood at her bedside, his hand resting on the railing, his expression solemn. To anyone watching, he was the picture of a heartbroken husband. But the nurses had already left, and no one saw the corner of his mouth curl upward. "End the support," Blake said quietly, turning toward Dr. Leonard, the physician overseeing his wife's case. His voice trembled, perfectly rehearsed. "She wouldn't want to suffer like this." The doctor hesitated. "Mr. Monroe, are you absolutely sure? She's still carrying." Blake's tone hardened. "The child's gone. She lost it days ago. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." He signed the papers with the same hand that had held her at their wedding. The same hand that had poured the champagne the night she crashed her car. A crash he made sure she would never survive. He left the room before the machines went silent. But what he didn't know was that the cameras in that private hospital weren't just for security. Someone had been watching him for weeks. Down the hall, a man in a tailored gray suit stared at the feed on his phone, his jaw tight, his eyes colder than the marble floor beneath him. Charles Hartman, Clara's father, had seen enough. "You just buried your own future, Blake," he whispered. As the machine slowed, Clara's body lay still, but her mind wasn't gone. Somewhere deep inside the darkness, she heard voices, fragmented like echoes underwater. "It's not your time yet." She tried to move, but her limbs wouldn't obey. Tears slid down her cheeks, unnoticed. Outside the hospital, reporters gathered like vultures. Blake stepped into his black sedan, dabbing fake tears with a silk handkerchief as flashbulbs erupted around him. "How will you remember your wife?" a journalist shouted. He paused, giving them the perfect headline, "As the love of my life." Then he smiled. A smile that would soon haunt every headline in America. Miles away, Charles's team moved Clara into an unmarked ambulance, bound for a private medical facility in Virginia. Her pulse was weak but steady. "She'll live," the medic said. Charles looked out the window toward the hospital, disappearing in the distance. "Good. Let him think she's dead." That night, Blake lifted a glass of champagne with his mistress, Sabrina Holt, to celebrate the end of a painful chapter. The moonlight caught the reflection of Clara's wedding ring, still on his finger. What he didn't know was that his wife's story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. 3 years earlier, no one would have believed that Clara Monroe, the glowing doctor with the soft laugh and gentle eyes, would one day become the face of a scandal that rocked New York's elite. Back then, she was the kind of woman who restored faith and love just by walking into a room. Blake Monroe saw her that way the night they met, or at least that's what he made her believe. It was at a charity gala downtown, a sea of diamonds, champagne, and empty smiles. Clara had been honored for her volunteer work with trauma victims. Blake, already a rising star in finance, had just been featured on the cover of Forbes as the young titan. Their paths crossed near the grand piano, where she stood alone, trying to escape the noise. "You don't look like you belong here," Blake said, offering a drink. "Is that an insult or a compliment?" she teased. "Both," he said, smiling just enough to make her blush. That night, he listened to her talk about her patients, her late mother, and her dream of opening a foundation to help families recover from loss. He made her believe he cared. He made her believe she was safe. Within months, they were inseparable. The brilliant doctor and the billionaire visionary. The media called them the golden couple of Manhattan. Clara had no reason to doubt him. Blake showered her with affection, gifts, and promises of forever. But behind the scenes, he was already weaving a web. Her father, Charles Hartman, had publicly questioned Blake's company's ethics years earlier. Blake never forgot the humiliation. Marrying Clara was more than love. It was strategy. By winning her heart, he could neutralize Charles, gain access to family connections, and silence the man who once called him a predator in a tailored suit. Clara never saw it coming. When she introduced Blake to her father, the air in the room froze. Charles's handshake was firm, his gaze sharp. "You climb too fast for a man without roots," he said. Blake only smiled. "And you judge too quickly for a man who's afraid to lose control." That tension never left. But Clara, blinded by love, convinced herself they'd eventually get along. "He's just protective," she told Blake one night. Blake kissed her forehead. "And I'll spend my life proving him wrong." 6 months later, they were married in a private ceremony in the Hamptons. The guest list was filled with billionaires, politicians, and celebrities. Clara looked radiant in her lace gown, unaware that every rose petal, every flash of the camera, and every whispered "congratulations" was part of a show scripted by Blake himself. That night, as fireworks lit up the ocean, Clara whispered, "Promise me we'll never become like them, cold, fake, cruel." Blake kissed her and said, "Never, my love." But while she drifted to sleep in his arms, he was awake, typing an email to his lawyer. Subject line: prenup revision, transfer assets quietly. Over the next year, Blake turned their marriage into a performance. Publicly, he was the perfect husband: flowers at her hospital, front row seats at her lectures, affectionate interviews. Privately, he controlled her every move: her finances, her foundation, even her friends. When she became pregnant, he tightened his grip. "You should focus on home," he said sweetly. "Let me handle the money." She didn't know the accounts were being drained. She didn't know her name was being erased from the foundation she built. She didn't know the man who held her hand each night was planning her downfall. To everyone else, they were a fairy tale. But inside their glass palace, cracks had already begun to form, hairline fractures that would soon split wide open. And one stormy night, the glass would finally shatter, and Clara would pay the price for trusting the wrong man. The night everything fell apart began like any other. A soft rain tapped against the penthouse windows as Clara folded baby clothes in the nursery. She was 7 months pregnant, glowing and exhausted. Blake had been working late again. She told herself it was normal that billionaires didn't keep regular hours, but something about the last few weeks gnawed at her. The secrecy, the constant phone calls, the hushed arguments behind closed doors. When Blake came home that evening, his cologne was different. His tie was undone, his eyes glossy with champagne. "You're still awake?" he asked, forcing a smile. "I wanted to show you the crib," Clara said gently. "It's finally done." He walked over, looked at the crib without emotion, then turned to pour himself a drink. "You shouldn't worry about these things, Clara. Just rest. Stress isn't good for the baby." She nodded, but her heart was pounding. After he went to shower, she reached for his phone left on the counter. The screen lit up with a message that froze her blood. "Transfer complete. She won't find out until it's too late." Before she could read more, she heard the shower stop. Clara dropped the phone, pretending to tidy the counter. Blake stepped out, towel around his waist, studying her reflection in the mirror. "Everything okay?" She smiled shakily. "Fine." But that night, she couldn't sleep. When dawn broke, she called a close friend at the bank, someone she trusted, to check her foundation's account. "Clara," the woman whispered, "your signature was used to transfer everything. Every dollar is gone." By noon, Clara was in her car, heading downtown. The documents she'd printed from Blake's home office sat on the passenger seat, a folder full of evidence proving his fraud. She didn't even care about the money anymore. She just wanted out. Rain lashed against the windshield as she called her father. "Dad, it's Blake," she said, voice trembling. "He's been lying to me." Static drowned her words. "Clara, where are you?" She glanced at the GPS. "Near the Lincoln Tunnel?" The next moment was a blur of headlights and screeching tires. A black SUV appeared out of nowhere, cutting her off. The car spun once, twice before slamming into the guardrail. Metal screamed, glass shattered, and everything went black. When she opened her eyes, smoke filled the air. The taste of blood coated her tongue. Pain ripped through her abdomen. "The baby," she gasped, clutching her stomach. Through the haze, she saw a figure standing by the road, someone tall, wearing a black raincoat. He held a phone to his ear, speaking calmly. Then he looked directly at her before disappearing into the fog. By the time the ambulance arrived, Clara's pulse was faint. The medics shouted orders, lights flashing red against the storm. "She's pregnant. 7 months. She's losing blood fast." At the hospital, Blake arrived hours later, immaculate in a navy suit, grief etched perfectly onto his face. "It's my fault," he told the cameras. She was depressed, driving too fast. Behind the closed doors of the ICU, doctors fought to save her life and the child's. One survived, one didn't. When the monitors flatlined, Blake closed his eyes, exhaling as if relieved. "She's gone," he murmured. But in another wing of the hospital, Charles Hartman received a private call. "Sir, she's breathing, weak, but alive." Charles clenched his jaw. "Keep it quiet. Move her tonight." As thunder rolled outside, the city mourned a tragedy. But somewhere in the dark, Clara's heart still beat, and vengeance began to breathe with it. Rain poured over the black umbrellas gathered outside St. Augustine's Cathedral. The air smelled of roses and deceit. Clara Monroe's funeral had drawn the city's elite, politicians, bankers, socialites, all dressed in grief that didn't belong to them. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and at the center of it all stood Blake Monroe, the widowed billionaire, face carved with perfect sorrow. He stood at the podium beside Clara's coffin, his voice breaking just enough to sound sincere. "She was my light," he said, eyes glistening. "A woman of kindness, compassion. She gave everything, and I failed to protect her." He paused, lowering his head as if overcome by emotion. Flashbulbs erupted like lightning. Every photo would tell the same lie: a grieving husband saying goodbye. But not everyone was fooled. At the back of the cathedral, a man in a charcoal overcoat watched from the shadows, Charles Hartman. His jaw tightened each time Blake spoke Clara's name. To the world, he looked like a broken father. But beneath that calm exterior, something darker burned. A cold, deliberate fury. When the service ended, mourners followed the casket outside. Blake placed a white rose on the polished wood, whispered, "Rest now, sweetheart," then turned away, slipping his hand into that of a younger woman standing nearby. Sabrina Holt. Her black dress was too short, her perfume too bold, her eyes too confident for a funeral. Cameras caught the moment her hand brushed his. The tabloids would call it grief's comfort. Charles called it proof. Later that night, as the last guests left, Blake poured himself a glass of scotch in his penthouse overlooking the city. Sabrina wrapped her arms around him. "You played that beautifully," she murmured. "Even I almost believed you loved her." He smirked. "Let them believe what they want. The insurance will clear by next week. After that, we disappear." Sabrina frowned. "Disappear where?" "Anywhere she can't follow," he said with a cruel laugh. "Clara Monroe is dead, and the world thinks I'm the victim." He didn't notice the red light blinking faintly on the balcony, Charles's surveillance drone recording every word. Meanwhile, miles away in a heavily guarded medical facility outside Richmond, Virginia, Clara's body was not in a coffin, but in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines. Her pulse was fragile, her skin pale as marble. Doctors worked in silence while Charles watched through the glass. "Will she live?" he asked. A doctor adjusted the IV drip. "Her brain activity is low, but there's hope. She's fighting." Charles's hands trembled as he placed them on the glass. "Fight, sweetheart. You're all I have left." He turned to his head of security. "No one knows she's alive. Not a soul. If Blake or the press find out, she's dead for real." By morning, every news outlet in America carried the same headline: Clara Monroe's tragic death leaves husband heartbroken. Blake's crocodile tears made front-page news. His stock value skyrocketed from sympathy. And while the world mourned, Charles quietly erased every trace of his daughter's existence from public records. 3 days later, Blake held a private reception at his home, champagne flowing, Sabrina laughing beside him. To new beginnings, he toasted. Somewhere in the dark, a voice whispered faintly from a hospital bed, "Not yet, not over." A nurse gasped as Clara's finger twitched. The heart monitor beeped once, then twice. Back in Manhattan, Charles poured himself a drink, eyes fixed on the rain. "You buried her too soon, Blake," he murmured, "and now I'm going to bury you alive." Charles Hartman had once been a name that made Washington tremble. Former FBI deputy director, cybersecurity magnate, and a man who built his empire from the ground up, he was respected and feared in equal measure. But when his daughter Clara married Blake Monroe, he retired quietly. He wanted peace, not power. He traded boardrooms for long walks by the river, strategy meetings for quiet dinners with Clara. She had been his redemption, his one reason to believe life could still be gentle. Now she was dead, and the world thought he was finished. At least that's what Blake believed. The night of the funeral, while champagne glasses clinked at Blake's penthouse, Charles sat alone in his study. The room was dim, filled with the faint hum of monitors tracking digital trails. Money transfers, deleted messages, encrypted calls. Blake's empire glowed across the screens like a web of greed. Charles stared at the center node labeled Horizon Capital and whispered, "You killed my child for this." He opened a drawer and pulled out an old photo. Clara at 8 years old, missing teeth, smiling with chocolate ice cream on her chin. His throat tightened, but his eyes stayed dry. He had cried enough the first night in that hospital when doctors told him she wouldn't make it. Now there were no tears left, only purpose. "Activate Project Valkyrie," he ordered. His head of security, a woman named Valerie Kane, appeared on the monitor. "Sir, are you sure? That operation was decommissioned." "Not anymore," Charles said. "We're bringing it back, for Clara." Within 24 hours, Charles's private team was in motion. Former agents, data specialists, and legal minds, all loyal to him from his years in the Bureau, quietly began digging into Horizon Capital. Offshore accounts, wire transfers, false identities. What they uncovered made even Charles's blood run cold. Human trafficking routes disguised as international investments, stolen charity funds, and proof that Blake had laundered millions through Clara's foundation in her name. "He used her signature," Valerie said grimly. "If this goes public, it'll destroy her reputation." Charles's jaw tightened. "Then we'll rebuild her reputation before we burn his." Meanwhile, Blake was enjoying his newfound freedom. The media painted him as the grieving husband who had turned pain into philanthropy. The Monroe Foundation for Mental Health, funded by Clara's stolen money, made headlines as the city's newest charity. Sabrina, now publicly at his side, smiled in every photograph. "See, baby?" Blake told her one night, adjusting his cufflinks. "The world loves a comeback story. They'll never suspect a thing." But a thing was already in motion. Charles's team infiltrated Blake's network through one of his shell companies. A hacker named Dean planted malware in Blake's private server, capturing every message, every deal, every secret. Within days, they had everything. Proof of fraud, witness lists, even the fake police report blaming Clara's mental breakdown for the crash. Then came the moment that made Charles pause. A single text recovered from Blake's encrypted phone. "Unknown number. The job's done. The car went over. You'll never hear from her again." Charles's fingers tightened on his cane until his knuckles turned white. The timestamp was 11:37 p.m., the same moment his daughter's car crashed. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. "You hired someone to kill her," he murmured. "You made her die twice, once in flesh and once in name." Outside, thunder cracked over the city. Charles raised his glass toward the storm, whispering, "You've mistaken my silence for weakness, Blake. But I'm not grieving anymore." He sipped the whiskey slowly, eyes glinting with fire. "I'm hunting." The air inside the Virginia compound was cool and sterile, filled with the faint hum of machines that never slept. Behind reinforced glass and biometric locks lay the secret the world could never know. Clara Monroe, alive but suspended between life and death. For the first time in months, the steady rhythm of her heart echoed through the halls like a fragile drumbeat of defiance. Charles Hartman entered the room quietly, his reflection merging with hers on the glass. Tubes snaked across her arms, monitors traced faint green lines across dark screens. To the world, she was gone, buried under a marble headstone, but to him she was still here, fighting. "Good morning, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of love and fury. "You rest. I'll handle the monsters." The medical wing was hidden beneath the facade of a government research facility, one of Charles's oldest off-the-grid operations from his FBI days. Only 6 people knew the truth. Charles, 2 doctors, his head of security Valerie Kane, a nurse named June, and the hacker Dean who managed the digital blackout. No cameras, no internet connection, no records. Clara didn't exist. Dr. Patel, a neurologist in her 40s with sharp eyes and a calm voice, approached Charles with a tablet. "She's stable," she said softly. "The trauma was extensive. Internal bleeding, head injury, oxygen loss. But her brain is responding. If she keeps fighting, she might wake up." Charles nodded but didn't smile. "When?" "There's no way to know," Patel said. "Could be weeks, could be months. What she'll remember, that's unpredictable." He turned toward the glass again. "When she wakes up, she'll remember everything she needs to." Outside the facility, armed guards patrolled the perimeter disguised as maintenance workers. The forest surrounding the property stretched for miles, concealing the entrance like nature's own vault. Even satellites couldn't see inside. The roof was shielded with infrared blocking panels, one of Charles's own inventions. Meanwhile, in New York, Blake Monroe celebrated his rise to billionaire stardom. He appeared on talk shows, gave interviews about loss and resilience, even launched a scholarship in Clara's honor. Cameras adored him. Women pitied him. Investors worshipped him. The world had crowned him untouchable. But every empire has cracks. Back in Virginia, Charles's hacker Dean discovered encrypted transactions linking Horizon Capital to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. "Sir, this one's different," he said. "Looks like a payment for a private contractor." Charles's eyes narrowed. "Show me." The screen revealed the transaction made the night of the crash, $250,000 wired to a name that didn't exist. Attached was a digital note. "Job completed. No witnesses." Charles stared at it, his pulse steady, his voice deadly calm. "Trace it. I want a face." Days turned into weeks. Rain fell over the compound in endless sheets, washing away the outside world. Then one night something changed. June, the nurse, was adjusting Clara's IV when she noticed a flicker in the monitor. The heart rate spiked, then steadied. "Doctor!" she cried. Dr. Patel rushed in, her breath catching as Clara's eyelids fluttered. The woman who'd been still for months twitched her fingers, her lips parting as if forming a word. "Clara?" the doctor whispered. "Can you hear me?" Her voice was faint, dry, barely a whisper, but it was real. "Blake." Dr. Patel turned toward the security camera in the corner, knowing Charles was watching. Charles froze in his office, eyes wide, glass of whiskey forgotten on the desk. He could hear her voice through the speaker, weak but alive. He pressed his hand against the screen, whispering, "Welcome back, my girl. The hunt begins." The first thing Clara Monroe felt was pain. Deep, raw, and alive. Her body ached with every breath, every blink. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled her lungs. When her vision cleared, the ceiling above her was unfamiliar. Metal panels, soft fluorescent light. Panic surged as she tried to move, but her limbs felt like lead. "Easy," said a calm voice. A woman stepped into view, Dr. Patel, gentle but firm. "You're safe, Clara. You've been through a terrible accident." Clara's throat burned when she tried to speak. "How long?" "Almost 5 months," the doctor replied softly. 5 months. The words hit like a physical blow. She tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in her abdomen stopped her. Instinctively, her hand went to her stomach and froze, empty, flat. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. "The baby?" she whispered. Dr. Patel hesitated, her eyes heavy with sorrow. "I'm sorry, we did everything we could." Clara turned her face toward the wall, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. The pain of the crash had been nothing compared to this. Her child, gone, her life, gone. For days she refused to speak. The nurses whispered outside her room. They thought she couldn't hear, but she caught fragments. Funeral, husband, insurance. Each word twisted deeper like a knife. Then one morning she woke to find a man standing by the window. Tall, silver-haired, posture unshakable. Her father. "Dad," her voice cracked. Barely a whisper. Charles turned slowly, the steel in his eyes softening for the first time in months. "You're awake," he said, walking toward her. He took her hand, the same hand he'd once held when teaching her to ride a bike. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she asked the question she already feared the answer to. "Does he know I'm alive?" Charles shook his head. "No one does. To the world you died that night. Even your grave has flowers." Clara closed her eyes, trembling. "Good, let him think that." Her father's voice was low, dangerous. "I have evidence of what he did. The fake transfers, the offshore accounts, the payment for the crash. He thinks he buried you for good, but he buried himself instead." Clara stared at him, the grief in her eyes slowly hardening into something sharper. "I want to see it. All of it." In the days that followed, she learned the truth piece by piece. The forged signatures, the staged police reports, the mistress. Every detail was another wound, but it also fueled her. The woman who had been soft, forgiving, and trusting died in that crash. The one who woke up was something else, stronger, colder, and far more dangerous. Physical therapy was brutal. Every step felt like knives cutting through her legs, but she forced herself forward. Again, she told the therapist each time she fell. Again. Valerie Kane, her father's head of security, watched from the doorway. "She's got his fire," she murmured. Charles nodded. "No," he said quietly, "she's got her own." Weeks turned into months. Clara regained her strength, her voice, her will. Her reflection in the mirror no longer looked fragile. It looked focused. The scars on her body were proof of survival, not weakness. One night, she stood before her father's desk, dressed in a simple black coat, her hair cut short. "When do we start?" she asked. Charles slid a folder toward her, filled with photos of Blake Monroe and Sabrina Holt smiling for the cameras. "He's already moved on," he said. Clara's jaw clenched, her voice steady but burning with fury. "Then it's time I did too." And this time she wouldn't just survive, she'd make him wish she hadn't. Sabrina Holt had always thought she was clever enough to win any game. When she'd met Blake Monroe, she saw him not as a man but as a golden ticket. He was charming, powerful, and ruthless, qualities she admired because she shared them. She'd helped him rewrite his image after his wife's death, painting him as a widower devoted to charity. Together, they ruled every headline, every red carpet. But lately, something about Blake terrified her. It began with the nightmares. Every night, Sabrina dreamed of fire and glass, of Clara Monroe's car crashing in endless slow motion, her scream echoing in the dark. She would wake drenched in sweat, convinced she heard footsteps outside her penthouse door. She told herself it was guilt, but Sabrina Holt didn't feel guilt. She felt fear. That morning, she walked into Blake's office, heels clicking against the marble floor. He didn't look up from his laptop. "You're late," he said, his tone sharp. "I didn't realize I had a schedule now," she replied, forcing a smile. Blake finally looked up. His eyes, once magnetic, were colder now, detached. "You do when you live off my money." Sabrina's smile faltered. "Is that what we're doing now, keeping score?" He leaned back in his chair, the ghost of a grin on his lips. "Always, darling, that's how I stay on top." Her pulse quickened. This wasn't the man she'd seduced. This was a stranger. "You've changed," she said softly. "No," he said. "I've just stopped pretending." Later that evening, she found a folder on his desk while he was showering. Financial documents, coded names, offshore transfers. But what froze her wasn't the money. It was the last page, a list titled Loose Ends. 3 names. 2 were already crossed out. The third was hers. Her stomach turned. She slipped the page into her purse and forced herself to smile when Blake emerged. "Dinner?" he asked casually, buttoning his shirt. "Sure," she said, voice steady, though her hands trembled. They dined at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. Cameras flashed from nearby tables. Blake thrived under the spotlight. He toasted to second chances. But Sabrina's mind was elsewhere, calculating, remembering the rumors she'd ignored, his first business partner who'd disappeared, the assistant who'd been transferred overseas, and now Clara, dead and buried. Or was she? A few days earlier, she'd received an anonymous email, just one sentence and a photo attachment. "Do you really know who you're sleeping beside?" The image was grainy but unmistakable. Clara Monroe, unconscious but alive, hooked to machines. Sabrina hadn't believed it at first. She thought it was a sick prank. But now, watching Blake smile, she wasn't sure. That night, she returned home alone, poured herself a glass of wine, and opened her laptop. Her hands shook as she typed the words Clara Monroe accident photos. The search results were endless. Headlines, interviews, tributes. But one article caught her eye. "No autopsy performed at family's request." No autopsy. Her breath hitched. "Oh my God," she whispered. Suddenly her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You're next if you don't play smart." Her glass shattered on the floor. Hours later, Blake came home, his tie undone. "You look pale," he said, picking up a piece of glass. "Just tired," she lied, clutching her purse. Inside, the stolen page burned against her hand like a warning. He kissed her cheek, the gesture too soft to be real. "Get some sleep, Sabrina. We've got a gala tomorrow. You'll want to look perfect." She nodded, forcing a smile. But as he walked away, her eyes hardened. For the first time, she saw him clearly, not as her lover, not even as her enemy, but as a man who killed without blinking. And she knew one thing for certain. If Clara Monroe was truly alive, Sabrina Holt was going to find her before Blake did. The night of the Horizon Capital Gala was supposed to be Blake Monroe's crowning moment. The ballroom of the St. Regis shimmered with gold and glass, a monument to excess. Guests in designer gowns floated between champagne towers, while a jazz band played beneath chandeliers worth more than most people's homes. Reporters whispered that Blake was about to announce the biggest merger in his company's history, a deal that would make him untouchable. To the public, he was the widower turned visionary, a man who had conquered loss and turned grief into greatness. But beneath the glitter, the mask was starting to slip. Smile wider, Sabrina whispered through clenched teeth as cameras flashed. You look like you're plotting someone's murder. Blake chuckled without warmth. Maybe I am. She froze, uncertain if he was joking. But the glint in his eyes wasn't humor, it was hunger. Across the ballroom, a group of investors murmured nervously. They'd been promised returns that hadn't materialized. Whispers of missing funds were spreading like cracks in glass. Blake felt it too, the room no longer fully admiring him but assessing him. Judging. He raised his glass high. To the future, he declared, his voice booming. The crowd cheered on cue, but behind every smile, doubt was taking root. Meanwhile, in a hidden command center 2 miles away, Charles Hartman's team monitored the gala through hacked security feeds. Clara stood between Valerie and Dean, her face pale under the glow of the screens. It was the first time she'd seen her husband alive since the night he tried to kill her. There he is, Valerie murmured, still playing the hero. Clara's jaw clenched as she watched him kiss Sabrina's cheek for the cameras. He always loved an audience. Dean pointed to one of the monitors. Our malware's in. Once he connects to the company's secure server for the merger announcement, we'll have everything. Emails, offshore accounts, even the payments to the hitman. Charles nodded grimly. And once we do, the world will know what kind of man he really is. Back inside the ballroom, Blake stepped to the podium. Tonight marks a new era for Horizon Capital, he began, voice smooth as silk. We rise from tragedy with hope, integrity. The screens behind him flickered, static. Then the company logo dissolved into a cascade of numbers, then words, transfer confirmed, Cayman Islands, Project Clearwater. The audience gasped. Blake froze. What the hell? More data appeared, bank transfers, internal emails, and one message in bold white letters, the dead see everything. Gasps turned into murmurs. Sabrina's face went pale. Blake slammed his fist on the podium. Turn it off! He barked, but the tech team was powerless. The feed had been hijacked. At that exact moment, a text pinged on his phone. He looked down. You buried her. Did you think the earth wouldn't spit her back out? The glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. Blake? Sabrina whispered, trembling. What's happening? But he couldn't answer. His perfect world was collapsing. Live, in front of the same cameras that once worshipped him. Reporters were already rushing out of the room, phones to their ears. Investors shouted. The air thickened with panic. Somewhere in the chaos, Sabrina spotted a familiar face among the catering staff. A flash of blonde hair, eyes that looked too much like Clara's. Her heart stopped. Blake, she whispered, grabbing his arm, she's here. He turned, following her gaze, but the woman was gone. For a brief second, he saw his reflection in the mirrored wall. The confident billionaire was gone. What stared back was something hollow, cornered, terrified. The band stopped playing. The applause had died, and somewhere far away, Clara Monroe allowed herself the faintest smile. The man who buried her alive had just started digging his own grave. The chaos in the ballroom still hadn't settled when the main doors opened. A cold gust swept through the room, snuffing out the laughter, silencing the chatter. Blake Monroe froze mid-sentence, his glass trembling in his hand. Every head turned toward the entrance. And there she was. Clara Monroe stepped into the golden light like a ghost rewritten in flesh. Her long black gown shimmered with sequins that caught the glow of the chandeliers, her short hair styled sleek against her jaw. There was no trace of the fragile woman the world had mourned. Only power wrapped in quiet grace. The cameras that had worshipped Blake now swiveled toward her as if pulled by gravity itself. For one long second, the room forgot to breathe. Blake's mind refused to process what his eyes saw. No, he whispered, it's impossible. But Clara was very real. She paused at the top of the marble stairs, her gaze sweeping across the room until it locked with his. The corner of her lips curved into a faint knowing smile. Hello, Blake, she said, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. The crowd erupted. Reporters screamed questions. Phones rose like a sea of flashlights. Sabrina staggered backward, pale as a ghost. You said she was dead, she hissed. Blake's pulse hammered in his ears. She was, he muttered. She was. Clara descended the stairs slowly, deliberately, her heels clicking like a countdown. You really shouldn't have buried me with my name still on your company's paperwork, she said when she reached him. Her father's plan had worked perfectly. Charles had leaked her survival just hours before the event, enough to spark whispers but not confirmation. Every major outlet had sent extra reporters waiting for the truth. Now they had it. "Mrs. Monroe," one journalist shouted, "how are you alive?" Clara's eyes never left Blake's. "Turns out love doesn't kill you," she said. "Greed does." The crowd gasped. Flashbulbs went wild. Sabrina grabbed Blake's arm, whispering, "We have to go." But he stood frozen, panic and fury warring in his face. "You think this changes anything?" he spat. "You have no proof." Clara smiled faintly. "You're right," she said, nodding toward the stage where the massive screen still hung. "I don't. But they do." On cue, Valerie, standing in the control booth, activated the final file. The screen flickered, revealing video footage. Blake in his hospital suit, leaning over Clara's bed, whispering, "End the support." His signature on the death order filled the screen behind him. Gasps turned into shouts. One reporter yelled, "That's murder!" Another, "She's got him!" Blake lunged toward the stage, but security guards stepped in, blocking him. Sabrina backed away, shaking her head, whispering, "Oh my God." Clara didn't move. She simply watched him unravel. "You should have made sure I was dead, Blake. You taught me everything about survival and revenge." He stared at her, sweat beading on his forehead. "You can't prove I caused that crash." She tilted her head. "Maybe not, but your bank accounts can." The room roared with questions. Reporters surged forward, shouting for comment. Investors slipped out in panic. The empire Blake had built on deceit was collapsing before his eyes. Clara turned to the cameras, her voice calm and steady. "I'm here tonight for one reason," she said. "To remind every woman who's ever been silenced. You can be buried, but you can still come back." She walked past Blake, the crowd parting around her like water. For the first time, he was the one left standing in the dark. And as she stepped into the flashing storm of cameras outside, her words echoed through the ballroom. "The dead don't seek revenge, they demand justice." The gala ended in chaos. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashed, and the once untouchable Blake Monroe found himself shoved into the backseat of his black sedan like a criminal fleeing the scene. His driver shut the door and sped off through the rain-slick streets of Manhattan, while Blake sat in stunned silence, his reflection fractured by the neon lights. "She's alive," he muttered, as if saying it aloud would make it less impossible. "She's alive." Across from him, Sabrina sat rigid, her mascara streaked. "You said she was gone, Blake. You looked me in the eye and swore." He cut her off, voice sharp. "Shut up." The silence that followed was suffocating. Blake pressed his palms to his temples. Every move he'd made, every lie he'd spun, had depended on one truth: Clara being dead. And now, with one appearance, she'd undone years of work. The screens replayed in his mind, his face beside her hospital bed, his signature sealing her fate. He needed to regain control. He needed to disappear her again. Back at his penthouse, Blake stormed inside, tossing his phone onto the counter. Dozens of missed calls from investors, his lawyer, the press. His empire was crumbling in real time. He poured a drink with shaking hands, swallowing half the glass before slamming it down. Sabrina hovered near the door, clutching her purse. "You can't fix this," she said softly. "She's going to destroy you." He turned, eyes blazing. "No, she won't. I built everything she's standing on. If I go down, she goes with me." Her lip trembled. "Blake, listen to yourself. She survived a crash you paid for. Maybe it's time to... Enough." He grabbed her wrist, hard. "You don't get to talk about her." Sabrina yanked free, her voice trembling. "You're losing it. You're scaring me." Blake laughed bitterly. "You think I'm scared? I made her. I can end her again." But when Sabrina left the apartment that night, she didn't go home. She went straight to her car, locked the doors, and pulled out her phone. There was only one number she could think to call, the one from the anonymous email she'd received weeks ago. A voice answered on the second ring. Calm, low, authoritative. "Miss Holt, we've been expecting you." She hesitated. "Who are you?" "Someone who wants to make sure justice finds Blake Monroe. Meet us tomorrow, 10 a.m. corner of 5th and Mercer. Don't bring your phone." Before she could ask anything else, the line went dead. Meanwhile, across the river in the Virginia compound, Clara stood before a wall of screens watching live footage of Blake's building. Valerie handed her a tablet. He's spiraling. The press is circling, and his investors are fleeing. Clara's eyes were cold. Good. But panic isn't punishment, it's only the beginning. Charles entered the room. The files we released were just enough to rattle him. Now we go for the throat. We leak the offshore accounts and the bribery evidence tomorrow. Clara turned to him. No, not yet. Let him twist. Let him feel what I felt when he left me in that hospital bed, helpless, drowning. Charles studied her face, half proud, half worried. You're starting to sound like him. She didn't flinch. Maybe that's what it takes to beat him. In New York, Blake lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The rain outside drummed against the glass like distant footsteps. Every sound made him flinch. He poured another drink, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. From the shadows of the room, his phone buzzed. One new message. No name. Just words that made his blood run cold. Did you really think the dead can't speak? The glass slipped from his hand, shattering across the marble floor. For the first time in his life, Blake Monroe was afraid, and he had every reason to be. The morning light sliced through the city like a blade. Blake Monroe hadn't slept. He stood by the window of his penthouse, staring at the skyline that used to feel like his kingdom. Now it looked like a prison made of glass. His phone buzzed every few minutes. Lawyers, investors, journalists, but he didn't answer. Every headline screamed the same thing. Billionaire exposed, wife alive. He poured another drink, though it was barely 8 a.m. His empire was unraveling faster than he could lie. Meanwhile, across town, Sabrina Holt parked her car on Mercer Street. She wore dark sunglasses and a long trench coat that did little to disguise the panic etched into her face. A man in a gray suit was waiting near a coffee shop, reading a newspaper. Without looking up, he said, "Miss Holt, you're late." "Who are you?" she asked, clutching her purse. The man folded the paper, revealing a small silver badge tucked inside his jacket. "Let's just say I work with people who don't like Blake Monroe." Sabrina hesitated. "You mean the FBI?" He smiled faintly. "Not officially. Think of us as interested parties." He handed her an envelope. "We know about the offshore accounts, the staged death, the payments, but we need proof, someone inside." Her breath hitched. "You want me to betray him?" The man's gaze hardened. "You already did. You just haven't admitted it yet." Sabrina's fingers tightened around the envelope. "If I do this, I want immunity." "Help us bring him down," he said, "and you'll get more than that. You'll get your life back." Back at Horizon Capital, Blake was in his office when his assistant rushed in. "Sir, the board wants an emergency meeting. They're threatening to remove you as CEO." Blake slammed his glass against the desk. They wouldn't dare. But they would. The evidence leaking online was devastating. Transaction records, falsified audits, and the viral video from the gala. Every shred of his credibility was burning. That afternoon, Sabrina walked into the office, every step rehearsed. "We need to talk," she said. Blake looked up, eyes bloodshot. "Not now." "It's important," she insisted. He stared at her, suspicion flickering. "You've been distant. Nervous? What's going on, Sabrina?" She forced a laugh. "You're paranoid." "Maybe," he said quietly, "but paranoia keeps me alive." He stood, circling her like a predator. "Tell me, where were you this morning?" She swallowed hard. "Shopping." He smiled faintly. "Funny. My security saw you meeting a man near 5th and Mercer." Her blood ran cold. "Who is he?" Blake demanded. "What did you tell him?" Sabrina's lips trembled. Before she could speak, Blake's hand shot out, gripping her throat just enough to make her gasp. "You think you can betray me?" he hissed. "I made you." Tears welled in her eyes. "Let go, Blake, please." He released her abruptly, stepping back with a cruel smirk. "You're not leaving me, Sabrina, because if I go down, I'll drag you to hell with me." But what Blake didn't know was that the conversation was being recorded. The tiny microphone pinned to Sabrina's coat transmitted every word straight to Charles Hartman's team in Virginia. Valerie leaned toward the speaker. "He's confessing." Charles crossed his arms. "Let him hang himself." In the penthouse, Sabrina's fear turned to fury. "You know what, Blake?" she said, her voice shaking but defiant. "You should have killed me when you had the chance." He froze. "What did you say?" She smiled faintly. "You'll find out soon enough." That evening, Sabrina slipped out of the building, clutching a flash drive in her pocket, the full recording of their conversation. She handed it to the same gray-suited man waiting by her car. "Good work," he said. "You just gave us everything we need." As she turned to leave, he added, "You should get out of the city, tonight." Sabrina frowned. "Why?" He met her gaze, voice low. "Because when he realizes what you've done, He'll come for you." And somewhere in the dark, Blake Monroe poured another drink, staring at the empty spot where Sabrina's car should have been. For the first time he smiled, not from love, but from the promise of revenge. The courthouse buzzed with a tension that could be felt through the marble floors. Cameras lined the steps, reporters jostling for space as news anchors spoke in urgent tones. Today, billionaire Blake Monroe faces charges of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted homicide, following shocking revelations that his wife, once presumed dead, has returned to testify. Inside, the air was thick with whispers and flashing bulbs. Blake sat at the defense table, jaw clenched, his expensive suit doing little to hide the cracks forming beneath his composure. His lawyers flanked him like vultures, whispering strategies that even they no longer believed would work. Across the aisle sat Clara Monroe, alive, composed, and devastatingly calm. She wore a navy suit, no jewelry, no makeup excess, just a quiet power that demanded attention. Every journalist's lens found her, every flash immortalized her return. Charles Hartman sat behind her, his presence a silent wall of steel. When the judge entered, the room fell into silence. "All rise." Blake didn't look at Clara at first, but when he finally did, their eyes locked for the first time in public since the night she'd died. For a fleeting moment, the confidence drained from him. She didn't look angry. She looked certain. That scared him more than rage ever could. The prosecution began. "Mr. Monroe, we have evidence that you forged financial documents, staged your wife's death, and transferred millions through offshore accounts." Blake's lawyer objected, but the judge waved him off. "Overruled. Continue." The prosecutor gestured toward a monitor. "Your Honor, Exhibit 32, a recording obtained by federal investigators." The screen came to life, projecting Blake's voice through hidden speakers. "You think you can betray me? I made you." Sabrina's recorded sobs echoed through the courtroom. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Blake's face turned white. "That recording is illegal." The prosecutor cut him off. "So was trying to murder your pregnant wife." The judge pounded the gavel once. "Order." But the room had already erupted. Cameras clicked, reporters whispered furiously. Blake clenched his fists, his composure unraveling. Then came the moment Clara had waited for. The prosecutor nodded toward her. "Mrs. Monroe, please take the stand." Every camera turned. The air itself seemed to hold its breath as Clara walked forward, each step deliberate. She took the oath, her voice steady. "I swear to tell the truth." "Mrs. Monroe," the prosecutor began, "can you tell the court what happened the night of your accident?" Clara's gaze didn't waver. "It wasn't an accident," she said. "My husband hired someone to tamper with my car. He thought the crash would kill me, and it almost did." Blake slammed his hand on the table. "She's lying." Clara didn't flinch. "If I were lying, I'd still be dead." A murmur swept through the courtroom. The prosecutor continued. "Did you authorize any of the financial transfers made in your name?" "No," Clara said. "He used my signature while I was in a coma. He stole my foundation, my reputation, and tried to erase my existence." The prosecutor played another piece of evidence, an email from Blake to his accountant. "Move everything tonight. Once she's gone, I want no trail." Blake's lawyer whispered frantically, "We can still settle." "Shut up," Blake hissed. When it was her father's turn to testify, Charles approached the stand like a soldier going to battle. He detailed every hidden transaction, every fake report, and every bribe. "He underestimated the wrong family," Charles said. "He forgot that justice doesn't die just because someone tries to bury it." By the end of the day, the jury had seen enough. The judge's gavel fell. Court will recess until tomorrow for final statements. As Blake was escorted out, he looked back at Clara. His voice was low, venomous. "You think this is over? You'll regret ever coming back." Clara met his gaze calmly. "I already regret loving you. Everything else is justice." And as the courtroom doors closed behind him, the world finally saw what he truly was. Not a visionary, not a victim, but a predator cornered by the prey he created. And tomorrow, the verdict would finish what the crash started. The morning of the verdict dawned gray and heavy, like the city itself was holding its breath. Outside the courthouse, crowds pressed against barricades, reporters shouting into microphones as helicopters hovered above. "Today marks the possible end of the Monroe dynasty," one anchor said. Once a symbol of power, Blake Monroe now faces a lifetime behind bars. Inside, the courtroom was packed to suffocation. The smell of tension and stale coffee hung in the air. Blake sat rigid in his chair, his once polished appearance unraveling. His tie was crooked, his eyes bloodshot, and his arrogance had curdled into raw panic. Every whisper, every click of a camera, felt like a countdown. Across the aisle, Clara sat between her father and Valerie. Her face was calm, unreadable, but inside her heart thundered. Months of hiding, planning, and reliving the crash had brought her here. Justice wasn't just close, it was inevitable. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. "This court has reached a verdict." Blake leaned forward, jaw clenched. The jury foreman stood. "We find the defendant, Blake Monroe, guilty of fraud, embezzlement, and attempted homicide." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Reporters scrambled for their phones, cameras flashing like lightning. Blake's lawyer buried his face in his hands. Blake, however, didn't move. He sat frozen, disbelief carving deep lines into his face. "No," he whispered. "No, this isn't possible." But it was. The judge's voice cut through the noise. "Mr. Monroe, your empire was built on lies, deceit, and greed. You will spend no less than 30 years in federal prison." Blake exploded. "You think you can do this to me? I am Horizon Capital." The judge banged the gavel. "You were, not anymore." As guards stepped forward to restrain him, he turned his fury on Clara. "You ruined me," he shouted, his voice echoing through the chamber. Clara met his rage with calm precision. "No, Blake, you ruined yourself the moment you decided my life was worth less than your money." He lunged toward her, but the guards caught him, dragging him back in handcuffs. The flash of cameras captured the moment. The fallen billionaire, veins bulging, screaming her name while she sat unshaken. Outside, the news broke across every channel. Blake Monroe found guilty. Stocks plummeted within hours. Horizon Capital's board announced his removal. By nightfall, federal agents raided his offices, seizing servers, documents, and personal assets. The empire he'd built on fraud collapsed like a house of cards. At the Virginia compound, Charles and his team watched the coverage in silence. Valerie turned to Clara. "It's done. You won." Clara shook her head. "Not yet. Winning isn't the same as healing." Charles placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've done more than anyone thought possible. He'll rot for what he did." Clara looked at the TV screen showing Blake being shoved into a black van, his wrists bound. "Prison isn't enough," she murmured. "He needs to know what loss feels like." Valerie raised an eyebrow. "You mean Sabrina?" Clara nodded slowly. "She helped him destroy everything I loved. She doesn't get to walk away clean." In Manhattan, Sabrina watched the same footage from her apartment. Tears streaked her face. Not for Blake, but for herself. She had traded her soul for luxury, and now she was the last piece of his broken puzzle. Her phone buzzed. A single message from an unknown number, "You're next." Her blood ran cold. Meanwhile, Blake sat alone in a holding cell, the hum of fluorescent lights above him. Sweat trickled down his temple as he whispered her name again. "Clara." He could still see her eyes in the courtroom, steady, merciless, alive. He slammed his fists against the metal table. "You think you've won?" He snarled to the empty room. "This isn't over." But it was. Outside those steel bars, his world had already burned to ashes. And as the city slept, the woman he tried to bury walked free beneath the same stars, whispering into the night, "Let the empire rot. Tomorrow, we bury the mistress." Sabrina Holt had always been good at running, from small-town scandals, from lovers she'd used, from every mess she'd made. But this time, there was nowhere left to go. The morning after Blake Monroe's conviction, the world turned its eyes toward her. Headlines screamed, "Billionaire's mistress under investigation." Reporters camped outside her penthouse, cameras waiting like vultures. Every time she stepped near the window, flashbulbs exploded. She hadn't slept. The TV blared non-stop coverage. Footage of Blake in handcuffs, of Clara leaving court calm and radiant, of commentators debating how the woman behind the crime would be next. Sabrina muted the sound but couldn't silence her thoughts. When her phone buzzed, she flinched. The caller ID read unknown. She answered, voice shaking. "Hello?" A calm voice replied. "Miss Holt, you're scheduled for questioning at the federal building at 10 a.m. Don't be late." Her mouth went dry. I told you everything already. I gave you the recordings." "Then you have nothing to worry about," the agent said, hanging up. But Sabrina knew better. In Blake's world, no one walked away clean. By noon, she was packing. Cash, passport, jewelry, the flash drive, her insurance policy. She slipped it into her purse and dialed a private number. "Tom, it's me. I need a plane. Tonight, Dubai." The voice on the other end hesitated. "Sabrina, everyone's watching the airports. You won't make it." She gritted her teeth. "Just get it ready." Outside, rain began to fall, blurring the skyline. Sabrina threw on a trench coat and sunglasses, heading for the service elevator. The lobby was crawling with reporters, but the back exit was clear. She slid into a waiting cab, heart pounding. "JFK," she told the driver. Halfway across the bridge, her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "What do you want?" A woman's voice, calm, familiar. "You're running from the wrong person, Sabrina." Her blood ran cold. "Clara, did you think I wouldn't find you?" Clara's voice was steady, almost kind. "You helped him destroy my life. You watched me burn." "I didn't know," Sabrina cried. "He said you were gone." "I thought." "You thought wrong," Clara said, "and now you'll tell the world everything you did, or I will." The line went dead. Sabrina's hands trembled. The cab slowed in front of the airport. Cameras were everywhere. She lowered her sunglasses and pushed through the crowd, ignoring the shouted questions. But as she reached the terminal doors, 2 federal agents stepped in front of her. "Miss Holt," one said, "we have a warrant for your arrest." "No," she stammered, clutching her purse. "You don't understand. I'm the victim." They took the bag from her, the flash drive falling out, scattering onto the wet pavement. The agent picked it up. "What's this?" Sabrina went still. "That's nothing. Just," he inserted it into a tablet. The files opened. Dozens of transactions, fake passports, offshore accounts, all tied to her name. Blake had framed her long before his fall. Her knees buckled. "He set me up," she whispered. "He set me up." At that moment, a reporter shouted, "Sabrina, any comment on your role in the Monroe fraud case?" Cameras flashed as the agents led her away in handcuffs. She tried to cover her face, but it was too late. The world saw everything, her fear, her guilt, her collapse. That night, Clara watched the footage from her father's office. Sabrina's arrest played on every channel. Valerie switched off the TV. "Poetic, isn't it?" she said. "The mistress always falls last." Clara stared out the window, her reflection framed against the storm. "No," she said softly, "she falls loudest." In her cell, Sabrina wept into her hands. The only thing louder than the reporters' voices was her own regret. The woman who helped bury Clara Monroe had finally dug her own grave. The storm outside the Hartman estate had lasted all night, sheets of rain slamming against the windows as if the world itself was purging its sins. Clara stood in the library, staring at the fire burning low in the hearth. Blake was in prison, Sabrina was behind bars, and her father's name was cleared. The world believed the story was over, but deep down she felt something unfinished, something wrong. Charles entered quietly, holding a folder. "You should rest," he said. "It's finally done?" Clara didn't turn. "I've rested enough." "What's that?" He hesitated. "Something Valerie's team found in the FBI archive. A name, Noah Monroe." The sound froze her. "Monroe?" "Blake's brother," Charles said. "Estranged for years, he disappeared after their parents died. But according to these records, he was in New York the night of your crash." Clara frowned. "Are you saying he helped Blake?" Charles's expression was unreadable. "I'm saying we don't know yet." Hours later, Clara sat alone in the garden, watching raindrops slide down the glass. Her scars itched when she thought of the crash, the flash of headlights, the black SUV. Her mind replayed it, frame by frame, until something new surfaced. A memory she hadn't noticed before. A voice. Deep. Urgent. "Hold on. Don't close your eyes." Her breath caught. That voice hadn't been Blake's. It had been softer, younger. A stranger's voice pulling her from the wreckage. She rushed back inside. "Dad," she said. "I remember. Someone pulled me out of the car that night." Charles's brow furrowed. "The medics found you unconscious?" "No," she said firmly. "Someone was there before them." That evening, Valerie tracked the ambulance logs. There was a 911 call made 5 minutes before the official dispatch, she said. The caller never gave a name, but the number traces to a prepaid phone, purchased in Brooklyn by a man using the alias Noah Gray. "Gray," Charles repeated. Monroe spelled backward. Clara's pulse quickened. "Find him." 2 days later, Valerie found him. Noah Monroe stood outside a small cabin near the Hudson, the same sharp jawline and piercing eyes as his brother, but there was something different in them. Guilt. When Clara stepped out of the car, his face went pale. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I need answers," she replied. He looked away. Your father won't like what I have to say. Charles stepped forward. Try me. Noah sighed. Blake hired me to handle the crash. I was supposed to make sure it looked like an accident. I didn't know he planned to kill her. When I saw her car spin out, I couldn't. His voice broke. I pulled her out myself. I called 911 and ran before the cops came. Charles's jaw tightened. Why didn't you come forward? Because Blake would have killed me too, Noah said. And because part of me thought maybe she really was better off dead than living with what he'd done. Clara stepped closer, eyes glistening. You saved me. He nodded slowly. And I've regretted it every day since. Charles bristled. You were part of his crime. I know, Noah said quietly. That's why I turned over everything I had. Emails, payment records, proof that Blake planned every detail. It's yours now. He handed Clara a flash drive. She took it, her fingers trembling. Why give it to me? Noah met her gaze. Because I couldn't save your child. But maybe this will save someone else. For a long moment, no one spoke. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy and still. Then Clara said softly, You can't undo what you did, Noah, but you can help me finish it. He nodded, tears threatening to fall. Tell me what you need. As they drove back, Charles glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror. You trust him? No, Clara said, staring out at the clearing sky. But I trust fate. It kept him alive for a reason. The man who once helped bury her had become the key to unearthing the final truth. The following evening, the Hartman estate was cloaked in fog. A single lamp burned in the library, casting long shadows across the walls lined with books and secrets. Clara sat opposite Noah Monroe at the table, her eyes locked on his. Between them lay a small recorder, its red light glowing like an unblinking eye. Start from the beginning, she said softly. Noah swallowed hard. You already know Blake paid me, but you don't know why I agreed. Charles, standing behind his daughter, crossed his arms. Because you're just like him, a greedy coward. Noah looked down. That's what I thought too, but it wasn't money I wanted, it was revenge. Clara frowned. Revenge for what? Noah took a deep breath, his voice trembling. Our father, Richard Monroe. Blake blamed your father for his suicide. Said Charles's testimony ruined him. Blake wanted to destroy your family, and I believed him. I wanted to hurt you both. So when he asked me to help stage an accident, I agreed. Charles's expression hardened, but Clara raised a hand to stop him. Go on. I sabotaged your brakes, Noah continued, his words heavy. But when I saw the crash, when I saw you bleeding inside that car, something broke. You weren't supposed to die. Blake lied. He wanted you gone, not scared. Gone. He looked at her then, eyes raw with guilt. I dragged you out, called 911, and ran before the cops arrived. But I kept everything, his messages, his plans, because part of me knew this day would come. Charles's voice was cold. You could have stopped all of this years ago. I know, Noah said. But Blake owned people, politicians, judges, cops. If I'd spoken then, he would have buried me too. Clara studied him in silence, searching for a lie. But there was none. His shame was too real, his voice too broken. Why tell us now, she asked. Because it's not over, Noah said, leaning forward. Blake may be in prison, but he's not done. He has people on the outside, loyalists, fixers. They're planning to move what's left of his money and destroy whatever evidence remains. He still thinks he can come back. Charles scoffed. From a cell? Noah shook his head. He's smarter than you think. He built that empire like a virus. It spreads even when he's gone. The drive I gave you has their names, bank accounts, offshore networks, but you have to move fast. Valerie entered the room then, holding a laptop. Sir, he's telling the truth, she said. Encrypted transactions started last night from Horizon Capital's shadow accounts. Someone's trying to clean up what's left. Charles exhaled sharply. So even behind bars, he's still playing. Clara's voice was steady. Then, so are we. Noah reached into his jacket and pulled out an old envelope. There's one more thing, he said. A letter Blake sent me 2 days before your crash. It proves intent. He wrote, when she's gone, I'll finally be free. I never destroyed it. Clara took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was the familiar handwriting that once wrote her love notes. But this one was a death sentence. Her father leaned closer. This letter is enough to add attempted murder to his conviction. You realize what that means? Noah nodded. It means he'll never get out. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the crackling fire. Then Clara pressed the recorder's stop button. "You're going to testify," she said. Noah blinked. "You trust me to do that?" "I don't trust you," she said quietly. "I trust consequences." Charles placed a hand on her shoulder. "You sound like me." She met his eyes. "No, Dad, I sound like someone who finally stopped being afraid." As Noah rose to leave, the weight of what he'd confessed hung heavy in the room. But beneath the tension was something new. Momentum. The truth had finally come to light, and for the first time, Clara realized justice wasn't just survival. It was war. And tomorrow, the world would hear Noah Monroe's confession, and Blake would lose everything left to his name. The following weeks unfolded like a rebirth. After Noah Monroe's public confession, the world erupted. Every headline bore Clara's name, not as the victim of a billionaire's betrayal, but as the woman who brought down an empire. "Survivor turned Avenger," one magazine cover read. "The woman who outsmarted a monster," declared another. But Clara didn't want fame. She wanted purpose. She sat in her father's office overlooking the Hudson River, sunlight spilling across the floor. The same city that once buried her was now whispering her name like a legend. But she felt only a quiet ache, the kind that comes after surviving something that should have killed you. Charles entered, holding a folder marked "The Monroe Case, Closed." "It's done," he said. Blake's sentence was extended. 50 years without parole. Clara exhaled slowly. "Justice," she said softly, "but not peace." Her father studied her face. "Peace doesn't come from punishment, Clara. It comes from what you build after." That night, she couldn't sleep. She walked through the halls of the estate, each step echoing against marble and memory. The house was filled with silence and ghosts. The baby's room she never used, the laughter she'd forgotten how to make. At dawn, she stood on the balcony, watching the city wake. A thought came to her like a whisper. What if survival could save someone else? By noon, she had a plan. She called Valerie and Dean into the study. "I want to start something," she said. "Not revenge, not charity. Something real, something that helps women who've been silenced, stolen from, or left for dead. People like me." Valerie smiled faintly. "You're thinking of a foundation." Clara nodded. "Yes, the Adam Project." The name hit the air like a prayer. Adam, the son she'd lost before he ever took a breath. "It'll focus on women's recovery, legal defense, and financial protection," Clara continued. "We'll create a network where no one has to choose between silence and survival." Charles looked at her with quiet pride. "You've turned pain into armor, sweetheart. That's something even I couldn't teach you." Within months, the Adam Project Foundation launched publicly. The press flooded the event, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. But this time, Clara wasn't the story. The women she helped were. The first woman to speak was Maria Lopez, a domestic abuse survivor. Her voice trembled as she said, "I was lost until the Adam Project found me. Clara Monroe showed me that surviving isn't shameful. It's strength." The room erupted in applause. Clara stood at the podium, tears glimmering but unshed. "For years," she said, "my story was told by people who wanted to profit from my pain. Today, I take it back, and I share it with every woman who's ever been told she's powerless. You are not." The crowd rose to their feet. Even Charles, who rarely showed emotion, wiped a tear. Later, after the event, Valerie approached her. "You realize what you've done?" Clara smiled. "I didn't rebuild my life," she said. "I built something bigger." News outlets praised her transformation. "Clara Monroe, from tragedy to triumph," one segment read. Donations poured in. Survivors from across the country reached out, calling her a symbol of rebirth. But while the world celebrated, Clara remained grounded. She knew the scars beneath her sleeve, the nights she still woke in cold sweats. Healing wasn't a destination. It was a decision she made every morning. One evening, as she locked her office, Noah approached quietly. "You really did it," he said. Clara turned, offering a faint smile. "We did it." He looked down. "You gave me redemption I didn't deserve." "No one deserves redemption," she said. "We earn it." They stood in silence, the skyline glowing behind them. Then Noah said, "Blake's lawyers filed an appeal." Clara's eyes narrowed. "Then we remind the world who he really is." Her reflection in the window was steady, fearless. She wasn't the woman who had been buried. She was the one who rose from the grave and built a monument to justice. And for the first time in years, Clara Monroe felt alive. Not because she'd survived, but because she was finally living for something greater than survival. The gray walls of Rikers Federal Correctional Facility rose like a scar against the horizon. A cold wind whipped across the yard as guards escorted a visitor through the security gates. Every camera turned toward her, Clara Monroe, the woman the world once buried, now walking into the belly of the beast to face the man who'd tried to erase her. Inside, the air was thick with bleach and despair. The sound of metal doors clanging shut echoed down the corridor as Clara followed the guard to a small visitation room. A thick pane of glass divided the space. On the other side sat Blake Monroe, thinner now, older, but with the same predatory gleam in his eyes. When he saw her, he smirked. "Well," he said, picking up the phone, "I guess the dead do make house calls." Clara sat, her expression unreadable. She lifted the receiver. "I'm not here for you, Blake. I'm here for closure." He chuckled darkly. "Closure? You think you can just waltz in here and feel better about what you did to me?" "What I did," she repeated, voice calm but sharp. "You tried to kill me. You stole my foundation, my life, my child." Blake leaned forward, his grin widening. "And yet here you are, stronger, richer, famous. I made you, Clara. You should be thanking me." Her knuckles whitened around the phone. "You made a monster," she said quietly, "but not the one you think." He tilted his head, studying her. "You came here because you miss me." She almost laughed. "I came here to make sure you understand something before you die behind these walls." His eyes narrowed. "And what's that?" "That you didn't win," she said. "You never did." Blake's laughter cracked through the receiver, loud and cruel. "You think your little foundation makes you powerful? You think the world actually cares? You're still the same pathetic woman begging for attention." Clara leaned in, voice low. "No, Blake. The difference is, now they're listening to me, not you." His grin faltered. She continued, "Every survivor you silenced, every woman your company exploited, my foundation's bringing them justice. The very name Monroe has become a warning. You destroyed yourself the moment you touched me." He bared his teeth. "You think this cage can hold me forever? I built connections you can't imagine. People still owe me favors. Sooner or later, someone will set me free." Clara smiled faintly. "I know. That's why I came." He frowned. "What are you talking about?" She slid a small envelope under the partition. "Read it." Inside was a letter stamped Department of Justice. Blake's eyes scanned the words, confusion shifting to horror. It was an official notice. All remaining Monroe assets and trademarks are now permanently transferred to the Atom Project Foundation. Every company, every account, every piece of his legacy, gone. "You can rot here for the rest of your life," she said. "But every time someone speaks your name, it'll be attached to mine and to justice." Blake's hand trembled as he crushed the paper. "You vindictive." "Save it," she interrupted. "You taught me something, Blake. Power isn't what you take, it's what you survive." She stood, placing the receiver down. The guard motioned for her to leave, but Blake slammed his palm against the glass. "Clara," he shouted, "you can't walk away from me." She turned back once, her voice steady. "I already did." As she stepped into the hallway, the doors clanged shut behind her. Blake's furious shouts faded into echoes. Outside, the air felt cleaner, lighter. Valerie was waiting by the car. "How'd it go?" she asked. Clara exhaled, a small smile tugging at her lips. He finally met someone he couldn't control. As they drove away, the prison shrank in the distance until it was nothing but a dark speck swallowed by the horizon. For the first time since the crash, Clara felt truly free. The monster was caged, the empire erased, and the woman once buried was now the one writing the final chapter. A year had passed since the verdict. The chaos, the cameras, the endless headlines faded into memory. New York had already moved on to its next scandal. But for Clara Monroe, life had finally slowed into something resembling peace. The morning sun poured through the windows of the Atom Project's new headquarters, a glass building overlooking the East River. The lobby buzzed with quiet purpose. Survivors laughing, lawyers working, volunteers bustling through hallways painted in warm, hopeful colors. The plaque by the entrance read, "For those who were buried but chose to bloom." Clara stood beside it, her reflection framed by the words. She looked different now. Stronger, calmer. The scars on her wrists had faded, but she never hid them. They were proof that she'd lived. Valerie walked up holding a stack of files. "Another 20 applications this morning," she said. Women asking for help, legal aid, protection. Clara smiled faintly. Then we're doing something right. Charles entered, his cane tapping lightly against the marble floor. His once gray hair was now stark white, but his eyes still carried that steel resolve. You've built something remarkable, Clara. I never thought I'd see the day my daughter's name stood for hope. Clara turned to him. You taught me how to fight. I just changed the reason why. He chuckled softly. And what's next? She looked out the window where the city shimmered like a promise. Healing, she said. Not just for me, for everyone who still thinks they're trapped in the dark. Later that afternoon, the Atom Project hosted its first anniversary gala. Unlike the opulent parties Blake once threw, this one was filled with authenticity. No diamonds, no tabloids, no empty praise. Just people who'd survived something hard and refused to stay silent. Clara took the stage as the audience rose in applause. Cameras clicked, but this time, the light didn't feel invasive. It felt warm. When I started this journey, she began, I didn't think I'd live long enough to see this room. I thought my story ended the night I crashed my car. But life, she paused smiling, had other plans. A ripple of emotion moved through the crowd. I learned something, she continued. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself that someone tried to steal. And once you do, you build something better, something no one can burn down. The audience stood again, clapping through tears. Charles wiped his eyes, hiding the gesture behind his hand. After the gala, Clara slipped away to the garden terrace. The city glowed beneath her, lights flickering like stars. Valerie joined her, holding 2 glasses of champagne. For you, she said. Clara accepted one. To survival? Valerie shook her head, smiling. To living. They clinked glasses. Moments later, Noah approached quietly. He'd stayed out of the spotlight, helping the foundation behind the scenes. You did it, he said. You changed everything. Clara turned toward him. We did, she replied. You helped me close the last chapter. He nodded, his eyes soft. You forgive me? She hesitated, then said, I don't know if forgiveness is the right word, but I've stopped hating you. That's a start. He exhaled, relief washing over his face. That's more than I deserve. As he walked away, Clara looked up at the night sky. The same stars she'd once begged to see again now shimmered brighter than ever. The ghosts of her past, the crash, the lies, the pain, finally loosened their grip. Charles joined her one last time, placing a hand on her shoulder. You did good, kid, he said quietly. She smiled. I finally understand something, Dad. What's that? That surviving wasn't the victory, she said. Becoming someone better was. He nodded proudly, his eyes glistening. The wind rustled through the rooftop garden, carrying away the last remnants of the storm that once defined her life. Below, the city pulsed with possibility. Clara lifted her glass to the stars. For Adam, she whispered, and for every woman who thought she'd never rise again. And for the first time, she wasn't just surviving, she was free. Because when they buried Clara Monroe, they didn't know they were planting a seed. So, that's how the story ends. Clara Monroe walked through fire and somehow came out brighter on the other side. And if you're still here right now, watching until this very moment, maybe something in her journey touched you too. Maybe it reminded you that no matter how broken things feel, there's always a way back to the light. You know, the Stoics used to say we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Clara's story proves that. The pain didn't define her, it refined her. Like Marcus Aurelius once wrote, what stands in the way becomes the way. Every betrayal, every scar, every sleepless night became the bridge to her strength. And maybe, just maybe, the same is true for you. So tonight, take a breath. Let go of what's behind you. You don't have to erase your past to start over. You just have to stop letting it own you. Healing isn't loud. Sometimes it's just choosing peace over anger, one quiet day at a time. If this story stirred something in your heart, give it a like, share it with someone who needs hope, and don't forget to subscribe, because our next story might be the one that helps you rise again.